Hey guys, it's Megan. We're back in the library today, and I actually read 4 books in the month of February, which even though it was a short month, I was pretty excited about. And I DNF'd 2 more that I got at least 30% of the way through, or 33%, so at least a third. So I'm pretty happy with the amount of pages that I read. So let's get to it. So the first book that I read in the month of February is the sequel to The Mummy by Anne Rice. And I told you guys I was reading, I skimmed through The Mummy. Basically, I wasn't going to reread that one because I read it so many times. And then I was rereading this one so that I could read the brand new one that just came out, which is Anne Rice's last book. So we'll get to that in just a minute. But I did read the second one in the series, which is The Passion of Cleopatra. And as I've said in like many videos, this is very different from the first book in both the writing style and the content. Because in the first book, obviously, Anne Rice, she was writing it by herself. This one is co-written with her son, and her son actually wrote the rough draft, he said in a podcast. So it's really mostly his writing, and she kind of helped with the ideas and helped editing and revising, but you can tell it's not pure Anne Rice. Like, you can get hints of her throughout, like I see her hand in it, but I can tell it's not purely her. But the story itself, it sort of takes off exactly, like literally from the moment that the second or the first book ended. But this one it kind of goes into more like big ideas, like what happens after you die, what happens to your soul, does it like a reincarnation sort of a thing in here. Cleopatra sort of becomes a main character, which she was in book 2 or book 1 as well, but in book 3 there's like no Cleopatra, like her character is pointless at that point. So I kind of wish that were explored a little bit more. But anyway, the characters don't quite seem to act like themselves either. Like Julie, which I don't want to give you a spoiler, but Julie, the main character, is very different from what she was in book 1, and I feel like she's just not even the same character now because of the change that she went through. But I like the plot. I mean, it's still good. I was actually glad that I reread it. Oh, and I gave this one 4 stars. So let's go ahead and talk about the next Anne Rice book. I, of course, read the brand new one that just came out, The Reign of Osiris. It is very short. And notice it only came out in paperback. I guess they didn't expect it to be very popular. It's the same case with the other one. So maybe, I don't know, there was just no hardback version, but it's just kind of strange. I guess, I don't know, it's sad that they just didn't expect it to be very popular. But I kind of see why, because, I mean, it's not the best Anne Rice book. And towards I'd say the first half of it, I was kind of sad because I was like, oh no, I'm not really enjoying this. And I'm like forcing myself to try to enjoy it because it's Anne Rice and I feel like I should. So I felt really guilty. And I hate even admitting that because I love everything Anne Rice has ever written and I say it's like the best thing ever. But this one, the first half wasn't as good. Now the second half, I actually really, really enjoyed. It does explore really big themes like the second book did as well, about kind of what happens to you after you die and is there a God. And I really like the supernatural element in this one. But the only thing I didn't really like about this one is, I know I talked in my vlog, which you'll be seeing soon, about the Russian assassin thing. For some reason, there are Russian assassins in a book about Egypt. And the whole connection that they have with Osiris is just really strange. They sort of tie it in with like World War I, but I don't know, it's really, really weird. I like the rest of it, but then there's like statues that come to life, and that just doesn't seem like something Anne Rice would write about, and I'm wondering if her son came up with that idea. I don't know, but you can also tell that her son wrote some of this, well, actually most of it, of course. There's phrasing that Anne Rice would never say that her son uses. Like one phrase said, for all intents and purposes, comma, blah, blah, blah. And that's just not a phrase that Anne Rice would use. I don't know why, it just bothered me. It's just not what she would say. But I still really enjoyed it, and I still gave it 4 stars, and I still highly recommend reading the whole series. Just know that book 1 is more of a romance, historical, kind of reminds me of the Mummy movie, like with Brendan Fraser, like it's that kind of vibe. But books 2 and 3 are totally different, and they're still really good, but they're just nothing like book 1. So I still really enjoyed them, and I would probably read this series again one day in the future. Another book I read that I gave 4 stars to as well, so it's a very 4-star month. In fact, all 4 books that I read this month I gave 4 stars to. That's really, really weird. And then of course I DNF too. But anyway, 4 stars to those 2 books. Then I also read Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. I've never read The Martian, and I wasn't interested in it. And I only read this one because it sounded so mysterious. And everybody said, oh, just go into it knowing very little about it, and then you'll really enjoy it. And I thought it was going to involve supernatural creatures or more like mystery. And turns out it's very much like hard science. There's just a lot of science. If you like science, the whole middle of this book is basically just pure science. It's clear the writer did his research and he knows what he's doing. I don't know that he was a scientist, but I feel like he had to have been to write this book. But anyway, I have a really rapid review, less than a minute long, where I go through and talk about my feelings on this book and kind of each step of the way. So I'll just kind of recap that right now. But basically, the first like 20% of the book, I listened to the audiobook and I listened to it very quickly, and I was really hooked and I was really into it. It really sucks you in right away. Then the middle really bogs down with the science, and if you don't like the science aspect, then you will not like this book because it is very science heavy. And then the last 5% was epic and amazing and made me recommend it to other people. I was like, yes, actually you have to read this because the ending is so epic and so good. The ending was absolutely wonderful. I loved it so much. The ending is 5 stars, but when I think about all the rest of it, and there's a few kind of logical inconsistencies in the book, like this guy is a high school science teacher, and yes, he used to be more than that, but right now, or no, middle school science teacher, and yet they include him in every important conversation about what's happening in the world, and you're just like, really? Like, that just seems kind of out of place. And there's some other things that are kind of inconsistent as well, but it is similar to what I hear to The Martian in tone and the plot, like man in space by himself, sort of by himself, like you meet other, I can't even explain it. I don't want to give any spoilers away, but the tone is quite humorous, I suppose, and very sort of lighthearted, even though he's like possibly going to die in space. He's just sort of very go with the flow, and I don't know, his commentary is pretty funny. It is in first person point of view, so you get to hear his thoughts. So I did enjoy that part. But anyway, I did give it 4 stars. I don't think I'd ever reread it because honestly, it was sort of the plot that just kind of kept me going. But I would definitely highly recommend it. The last book that I finished in the month of February was another 4-star read, and it was actually young adult, and we know that I don't have the best relationship with young adult, but it was listed as horror, so I thought I'd try something different, and this author is super popular in our library, and that is White Smoke by Tiffany D. Jackson. So this is the same author that wrote Grown, which has been really popular and won some awards. She also wrote Allegedly, which is a little bit older book that's super popular, but normally she writes like realistic fiction. Then she delved into mystery. This one though, this is considered horror, and there's definitely horror elements, but I would say the realistic part of it was more the focus. This book follows a girl who moves to a new city. She used to live in California, but now she moves to the Midwest, and of course she thinks her house is haunted. This is a haunted house story, but it's definitely a modern take on this haunted house. In the past, something happened. I won't tell you what because you don't really find out till later in the book, but something happened in her old town, and it kind of caused her parents to uproot their entire family and move and start over, and she's had some issues for sure in the past. She's been struggling, and she thinks that oh, my bookmark's still in there, but I did finish it. She thinks that basically like smoking pot is the only way to get over her anxiety that she has now, so she decides to like grow her own marijuana. And so I had no idea that that's what this book was going to be about, but it is. It doesn't tell you that in the summary, but I'm just going to let you know. So a big part of it is her trying to grow it, and there's a lot about gardening in this book, oddly enough. You would not know it from the cover, but because there's a gardening club and she gardens, and then there's this like weird, creepy like pastor guy who tries to sell everybody these miracle seeds. So yeah, that's all really kind of an interesting angle, but so there's a lot going on in this book between that aspect, the character's history, her current situation with trying to kind of, you know, she's brand new at a new school and she's dealing with a step sibling. She's got this little creepy stepsister who could be possessed at this point because the house is like really, really weird that they live in. A stepdad who is not really on her side. She's met this new boy at school. And even though, I mean, I'm not really a huge fan of like romance in my books that much, but in this one, it's very like realistic and it's very slow and it's not like insta love at all. In fact, you don't, I mean, well, okay, I can't tell you that, but that might be a spoiler. But it is, they said creepy, frightening. I wanted to scream. I don't know about that. There were definitely some creepy moments at one point when I was reading this book. I was asleep that night and I woke up in the middle of the night and I heard the house creaking, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's somebody in the house. And it turns out it was my husband. He was getting a snack in the kitchen. But it did creep me out because I was reading this book. The ending is a little bit rushed, and I hear that a lot of people, that's their complaint, because it just like wraps up. But I like the way it ended. If you don't want, I can't even say the ending at all, but the ending might not be what you expect if you want a true like horror story. So just kind of know that going into it. But anyway, yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I would actually recommend this book, especially the audiobook, because I really, really liked the narrator. And if you speed up the audiobook, you can listen to this thing in like 6 hours. I think the whole audiobook's only 8 hours, so I did like 1.5 times speed and listened to it in 6. So it's really short. It doesn't take very long to read. So I gave this book 4 stars, and I would highly recommend it. So let's talk about my 2 DNFs. First book I DNF'd was The Firekeepers Daughter. Now, I know this is gonna be pretty controversial because this won like all the Goodreads Choice Awards. It's like a Reese Witherspoon book club thing. I think it won a bunch of American Library Association awards. It's by Angeline Booley or something. It's also very large. We had it listed as mystery in our library, but I think I'm gonna recategorize it because to me, the realistic fiction aspect of this is really at the forefront. There is very little mystery to this. It reminded me a lot of Turtles All the Way Down by John Green because the mystery was not in the forefront of that book either. There was just a little hint of it in the background. And maybe this gets more mystery after I DNF'd it. I got to like 37%, so it's really hard to say, but as of where I was at, I mean, if you're 37% in to a mystery book and there's no mystery, then I can't really think that that would be a mystery, you know? So I would definitely categorize this as realistic fiction. But also, it reminds me of John Green's book because the writing style and the way the character talks, it actually sounds like John Green, which is weird. And I like John Green, but I didn't care about the plot of this book. It follows a girl who is, one side of her family is Native American and the other side is white. So she kind of has to reconcile those two heritages together because they're kind of in conflict. Her parents had her when the mom was like super young, like she was, I don't know, like 14 or 15 years old. And it was like the scandal of the town and all this stuff, especially because she had this baby with this Native American boy. And anyway, so she lives in Michigan and she plays hockey and it's a lot about hockey teams. And I just didn't care about hockey in Michigan. And it's also set in the early 2000s, and I have no idea why. What's the difference in having it set in the early 2000s versus now, or like way back in the past? It was just a really strange time period. And I saw someone else say maybe it was because that way the characters wouldn't have cell phones to solve all their problems. I was like, that's a good point. You know, if you just need to make sure the characters don't have the internet, then just set the book right before they had the internet. So I don't know, that's a possibility, I guess. But all that was just strange to me, and it was also super slow moving. If you'd asked me what had happened in the book at 37% in, there are 2 events that I could have told you that happened at that point. So I need more, I guess. So if you like slow-paced books about hockey in Michigan in the early 2000s and a little bit of stuff about Native American heritage, then I guess this is the book for you, but it was definitely not the book for me. The last book I DNF'd was Blackwing by, I already forgot the author, Ed McDonald, maybe, I think. This was the start of a trilogy, the Ravensmark trilogy, and I thought it just sounded so epic in scope because it is high fantasy, also known as grimdark fantasy because obviously this one is very dark. I tried listening to the audio, and I know we've talked about this before, that I have issues with fantasy and audiobooks because something about trying to learn all the names and places and characters and everything, not being able to look at maps and appendices and whatnot, is an issue when you're listening to an audiobook. But in this case, this was told in first-person point of view. It did not alternate between points of view or anything. There's just one narrator, so it's not like it was very complex fantasy. It would be good as like an introductory fantasy work if you don't read very much high fantasy because there's not tons of names and places and stuff. But I didn't care. I didn't care about anything that was happening. I mean, it was fine. And I guess, you know, if I could tell it was going to be 3 stars, that's how I know I'm going to DNF it. I made it to like 40% in, I think. So I feel like I gave it a really good shot. It's also really short. It was like 368 pages, I believe. So, you know, short fantasy, but it just, the very first part did captivate me. Like there was a lot happening in the first chapter. Then I just didn't care. And the main character is so just kind of annoying almost because he doesn't care about anything. He's just like, whatever. And the guy that read the book had an accent. And so just the way he read the character too, I just didn't like him. So maybe if I'd read it myself and not had that narrator's voice in my head being so annoying, I don't know. But anyway, I didn't like it. Maybe it's for someone else, but just kind of I just said it's your typical fantasy, typical grimdark fantasy, nothing outstanding about it. So it would have been 3 stars. So why would I continue it basically? So those are all the books I read in February. I feel like it was a pretty good month considering I read 4 4-star books and only DNF'd 2 because we know I DNF a lot of books. So I feel like I had a pretty good reading month. Not as much as January, but I mean, February is shorter. And I didn't have snow days in February. Like literally in January, I was never in school because we had snow days constantly. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what books you read in the month of February, and I will see you guys again soon. Bye.